Exclusion for a looked after child must be the last possible resort.
It is legal to treat looked after children slightly differently because of the situation.
What are the other parents going to say? I'm just waiting for them to say, you treated one like this and the other like that.
He needs to know that what he did was wrong.
Whatever your background, whatever your history in life, there are clear consequences for your actions.
I could not have the child in school.
Should looked after children who misbehave face the same sanction as the rest of the class? Our expert panel discussed an imaginary scenario which begins with a teenager whose home circumstances are starting to unravel. The moderator is Mike Baker.
Hello everyone, I want to introduce you to Lola. She's 14 years old and she lives with 4 younger siblings and with her mother, who is a single parent. Now, Chris Pearce, as a secondary school teacher, she's in your form. And on one particular day in school, you hear Lola has not been home for the last couple of days. She has been in school. What are you going to do about that?
I would either phone home myself or I would arrange for a colleague, possibly the designated teacher for child protection, to phone home to just check on her well-being, welfare, how things were.
Okay. Judy Gemmell, you are the specialist teacher responsible for looked after children in the school. What would you be doing about it?
Well, initially I just ring Mother in a just in a chat way.
Okay. You can't get through to Mother, no answer on the phone.
Then I would talk to Lola.
Okay. Well, Lola says, yeah, I've actually been staying at my gran's for the last couple of days. It's fine, I'm okay, but she won't tell you anything more than that.
Well, in that case, it would raise some alarm bells with me, and I might begin to wonder whether she really had been at Nan's, and I would probably at that point alert social services to my concerns.
I mean, actually, as yet, nothing terribly serious seems to have happened. She says she's been at her gran's for 2 nights. She's been turning up at school. There's no social services involvement with this family. Are we overreacting to say we might be considering contacting social services? What would you do then, Chris?
I think you need to take into account what we know of Lola's background, but at the same time, the dangers of underreacting and doing nothing are very real. Okay.
Judy, we get a little bit more information from Lola's younger sister, who says that she thinks she's either staying with her gran or she might be staying overnight at her boyfriend's. Boyfriend is named Gary, and he is in care. He's with the foster parents. Would you check with the foster parents of Gary to see whether Lola's been staying there overnight?
Yes, again, informally, I would just ring the foster carer and ask if she'd seen Lola.
Richard Marshall, you're the head teacher of the school. You can't get in touch with Gran, but you actually do eventually get hold of Mother, who says, oh yes, no, Lola's told me she's staying at her Gran's. So that's the end of it, isn't it?
Yes, unless I've got concerned staff who are picking up other signals and they're feeding that into me. But if I'm not getting anything else, then yes, that would be good enough for me.
Okay. Dawn Brent, your social worker, I say there's no social worker yet assigned to this family, but we do know that Lola is the main carer and not only looking after her mother, but actually to a large extent the younger siblings, and she is now not staying in the home. Does that ring some alarm bells for you?
Lola's a young carer in her own right. We could be offering her an assessment as a young carer to actually support her in what she's doing. It's a child in need issue at this time.
Okay. A little bit of time passes and there's a school trip coming up. It's an educational trip. They're off to a marine life centre and a trip to the coast, and Lola is going on this trip and she's very excited. She's never been to the coast before, doesn't get many trips generally. Chris, you're the form tutor of Lola. They're already on the bus, but then you realise actually that the permission slip for Lola has been signed not by her mother but by her gran. Same surname, so I'd understand why nobody picked it up before. Can she still go?
I would want to check again with the designated teacher for child protection, and I would also want to check with the head teacher as well. I would want to have full confidence that the adult who is responsible as a parent for Lola was aware of the trip and had given consent for her to go on the trip. Because if it's not signed...
Does the gran, does that count? Is that good enough?
No.
It's not good enough for you? No. Okay, you've made that...
It's not signed by the person who it's asked to be signed. It could be signed by anybody.
Right, okay. So you've passed it up partly as well to Judy as the specialist teacher, but there's been no formal notification to the school that Lola is now living with her gran. So what do you do?
Try and get hold of Mother.
and you can't get hold of mother, she's out.
Then I think
Coach's got to go soon.
Yes, that's a very difficult one, because you don't want to take Lola off the trip, but if you haven't got the permission and something goes wrong, you probably have to.
Richard, it's going to come down to you, I think, in the end. You're going to let her go?
I think my judgment would be yes, because, as you've pointed out, if it was another child from a different sort of background, I don't think any of this would have even cropped up. And we always make, you have to make these kind of judgment calls. And I think, realistically, I don't see anything really problematic about letting her go.
For the moment, she's okay. The coach is off. Penny Cooper, you are a lawyer and also chair of governors. She's got a signed permission slip, but it's not from her mother, it's from her gran, and there's been no formal information to the school that she's now living with her gran.
Well, Gran doesn't have parental responsibility, Mum does, and Mum should have been the one signing the consent. But what Richard found himself in was a very difficult position where he was having to balance legal niceties against the present situation, which could have been quite harmful to Lola if she'd been hoiked off the bus.
Absolutely.
But what it does flag up is a significant problem about knowing where she's living, who's got responsibility for her on a day-to-day basis, and what you're going to do in future when you need things signed by the person with parental responsibility.
Absolutely. Stephen Spooner, you're head teacher of the primary school, and Lola has a younger sister called Kylie, who's 10 years old. And let's just say for the moment that this is the primary school trip and that it's Kylie you're talking about, some of the same sort of concerns, signed by the gran and all the rest of it. Would you let her go, or would you say no, come off the bus?
No, I wouldn't have let her go. I would have asked her to come off the bus, and perhaps I would have done this in a sort of very kind way, so that it wasn't noticed.
Very difficult to do it in a kind way, and very difficult not to be noticed. But why? Why would you do that?
Because of the sort of health and safety rules, and taking a child away without the signature would have been difficult if anything could have happened.
So time moves along, and Lola and Gary and a couple of their friends, Chris, are going to come to you on this one, because what they've done is they've taken a mobile phone from one of the teachers, been throwing it around between them as the teacher tries to get hold of it. She gets pushed and shoved, and they're all pushing her equally. Eventually she goes flying, and she's hits her head, quite seriously hurt. Now, in normal circumstances, that sounds like the sort of misdemeanour which would involve at least a temporary exclusion, maybe more. What are you going to recommend on this one?
It's a very, very difficult issue, because the school has a duty of care to Lola, and quite clearly the misdemeanour that she's been involved in would naturally involve an exclusion from school. I would be very uneasy about recommending a fixed term exclusion if I wasn't clear on who was going to be looking after Lola when she was away from school and where she was going to be looked after.
Judy, you may have particular concern also about Gary, because he is a looked after child with a foster parent. There could be quite serious consequences, couldn't there, if he were excluded?
You'd want, in terms of the consistency of your approach, to treat all the children the same, but in certain circumstances it would be permissible. It is legal to treat looked after children slightly differently because of the situation. And I mean, I would look perhaps in this situation if there was any sort of internal inclusion unit or some sort of on-site unit where the students could be punished for what they'd done, but not actually excluded off the site or excluded to home.
Unfortunately, you don't have an on-site unit, but it's a good try.
Very remiss.
Okay, Penny Cooper, the school has turned to you for some advice. Is it allowed to make special treatment, special leniency, if you like, for children who are looked after? I mean, we've got children involved in the same misdemeanour. Can you treat them differently?
I think you treat every child who's involved in that situation as an individual child, looking at their particular needs and circumstances. So the short answer is yes. I think you can look at Gary as an individual and take into account, of course, his particular home circumstances.
Felicity Evans, you're corporate parenting officer. Different treatment for excluded children, is it justifiable?
Well, the new education regulations on exclusion indicate that exclusion should be the last possible resort for a looked after child. So, because, as has been said, the consequences are really very serious. And
last possible resort still leaves some flexibility, doesn't it, and decision making for the school, though?
Well, before they take that action. Absolutely, and that's what I would be recommending, really. We have a group of young people there who've acted in a way that's not helpful at all. But for a looked after child, and for Lola in particular, I think an exclusion would be unhelpful in this case.
OK, Richard, you've got to have the judgment of Solomon. What are you going to do? Are you going to make a special allowance for Gary because he's looked after, a special allowance for Lola because she's got slightly difficult circumstances?
No, I mean, there's nothing in the incident itself that suggests that it's a function of anything, you know, really so off the scale different from the other kids that they have to be treated differently. And also, what they've done is very serious. If you've said that they've assaulted this teacher, knocked her down, banged her head, you know, there's no way I'm going to have a staff that are going to come in the next day if nothing serious happens to these children. I think it is a serious consequence to exclude, but I've no option.
Right.
I think, therefore, what is different would be that arrangements would have to be made to make sure the exclusion worked, rather than find an alternative. So I think that the outside agencies, Social Security, the local PRU or whoever, whatever agencies we've got in line, would have to be informed of this and would be brought in to try and work this thing through. But I could not have the child in school for at least a lengthy time.
Yeah. So, Richard, you've taken that difficult decision, but you've decided that you will exclude them all for at least a few days and making no special allowance for the fact that Gary is in care or that Lola is in this rather sort of grey area. Dawn Brent, as Gary's social worker, have a word with Richard.
Yes, I mean, I'd like to know what length of time you're actually looking at in terms of an exclusion and what arrangements you would want to put in place to actually have Gary back. Well,
I think I would be talking about a couple of weeks for that, for knocking out a teacher kind of thing. I mean, this is a big. It's not like a minor incident, or it's not swearing. It's not even a nudge in a corridor or something like that. And I think that he will know that he's done wrong, and what we do has got to signal that it was a very serious misdemeanour, and that he is on the cusp of a permanent exclusion with that kind of behaviour.
Let's just go to Stephen Spooner. I mean, let's just for the moment say you're an assistant head in the secondary school. Same issue. Are you going to go with Richard or are you going to disagree with him?
Well, I'd actually be arguing against you, Richard, because I would be thinking both children have had a really hard life and a hard time with their own existence, and to exclude them and very vulnerable children, and then to have them out there. Maybe be able to be transferred from parent to parent. I don't think that's a good idea for them. OK, Sheila Patel, you're Gary's foster mum. Let's just deal with Stephen. Stephen says, actually, no, he shouldn't be excluded because special circumstances should be taken into account. What do you think?
I would disagree with that, because if I sign a contract to say I will treat this child as my own, I would expect other people to do the same. I do understand that you need to be compassionate and understanding with his circumstances, but he needs to know that what he did was wrong. He has to understand that, and he has to maybe bear the brunt of what others have to as well.
OK, go on, Stephen.
I actually feel that he probably does recognise that he's done something wrong, but actually in his life he's been wrong for a lot of the time himself.
And so have many others, but still managed to get through life.
OK, let's Penny Cooper, as you're chair of the governors.
I think it's probably too simplistic to look at it like that, but you know, I also hear what the head said. The punishment's got to fit the crime. That sort of idea. It's true, and I'm also, as a chair of governors, thinking about what are the other parents going to say. I'm just waiting for them to say, you treated one like this and the other like that, or they did this, it was despicable, you know, how come they're not excluded? So you've got to put all of this into the mix, and it's one where the law isn't going to give you an answer. It gives you a framework, and we've got to find a way through. The law isn't going to tell us what the right answer is. OK, it's clearly a really difficult issue, this one, whether you make special allowances. Let's just go for the moment with what Richard says, that actually they're going to be excluded. Chris, he's going to have to move foster parents. It may be out to another school.
I have to say that I would probably support the exclusion on the basis that I think we almost owe it to Gary to help him understand that there are clear consequences. Whatever your background, whatever your history in life, there are clear consequences for your actions. And just because you've had a difficult background doesn't mean that you just get let off. I think the message that sends for him to take into adult life is a very bad one. Yeah. Having said that, it's clearly going to be very bad for him having to move schools. I'm not suggesting that Gary gets let off at all. I'm totally in agreement that he needs to understand that he's done something wrong and serve some sort of consequence for that. I just think in this instance there are other ways to treat that situation, and an exclusion doesn't serve its purpose.
Dawn first, yes.
I think I'm quite concerned at the situation that this would automatically mean his placement would end. Sheila obviously cares greatly about Gary. He's obviously invested quite a lot in her and her family as well, and we would want to hold on to that to maintain that continuity. So from a social services point of view, I would want to be ensuring that we put in as much support as we possibly could. He's in year 11. You know, this is his one chance at actually achieving something, and perhaps one moment of stupidity. He shouldn't lose it all because of that.
Felicity, the teacher, head teacher, indeed foster mum, think that he should be punished in the same way as the others. Are you going to argue against that?
Yes, I would argue against that. I think it's on principle one should actually appeal against any exclusion for a looked after child. The exclusion guidance that has been published recently indicates that exclusion for a looked after child must be the last possible resort. And there are very good reasons for that, because once a child is excluded, particularly in Key Stage 4, the likelihood is that they never go back to school. Therefore, the consequences to that particular child's life chances are severe. Children in care are 10 times more likely to be excluded than any other kind of child. And I think we have to look at the bigger picture in order to do justice to this child. Having said that, I really believe this is a serious issue. But is exclusion the only way forward? And I think that's to be debated.
Okay, you had a good argument, but I'm afraid you haven't won it on this occasion, so he is excluded. How are we going to get him into another school? Because actually, he's not got a good record, he's been excluded. What sort of pressure can you as a corporate parenting officer put on other schools to make sure he does get a placement in another school?
Well, the Education Inspections Bill that came into force quite recently indicates that in times that aren't ordinary times of transition, a looked after child can get into another school. However, it is very unlikely another school will be able to match the exam boards, the subjects that he's been doing. That's what I mean about the bigger picture, really punishing him in a way that would be so detrimental to him. So it'll be very difficult to actually get him into another school, I would suggest.
Right. Sheila?
You see, we've gone from exclusion for a week to 2 weeks today to, it sounds like permanent exclusion now, which is my concern. I never said permanent exclusion. I'm happy for some form of punishment or chastisement for it, but not permanent exclusion.
Okay, well, we'll settle on a few days exclusion, okay? So he's not going to have to move school.
Good.
He's not going to have to move a foster parent, and we can all breathe a bit of a sigh of relief. But in this whole process, one of the things that we decided to get done, Richard, is to get Gary to see an educational psychologist. And we come back with some quite interesting results, actually, because actually the educational psychologist says this is a very, very bright boy. Not only does it turn out that Gary's very bright, he's actually got a lot of initiative too, because he's spotted that there are scholarships going at Eton, and he's applied for one, and he's got one. Judy, is this a good idea for him to be going off to an independent boarding school for his sixth form after he's done his GCSEs?
Well, it certainly bucks the trend, because looked after children don't have an amazingly strong academic record and have really very low targets set for them nationally. So that he should be able to win a scholarship and go on to higher education.
Let's see if Sheila thinks it's a good idea.
I think it's fantastic. I would be all for it. I'd be very, very proud of him, knowing what his background was and that he's achieved something that many children from his background don't achieve.
Dawn.
We actually forget sometimes that we do have gifted and talented children who, because of their home situation, because of what's happened to them, the reasons they've come into foster care or residential care, we often don't see their light until it's too late.
Felicity, it is government policy, isn't it, to encourage going to boarding schools, state and private?
The government at the moment are operating a pathfinder, so that looking at children who are either in the care system or who are on the edge of care, possibly like Lola is, to use the private boarding system to actually prevent those young people coming into the care system and to give them a very good education.
Richard?
I don't need gifted and talented children going to private schools, as if somehow, we can do it in the state sector. That would be my business there.
Okay. Slightly to your chagrin, he does go off to Eton, and we'll catch up with him later and see how he gets on. Meanwhile, let's go back to Lola. Chris, you're still her form tutor. She's 15 now. Unfortunately, Granny is getting very elderly and is very ill and really can't look after her anymore. And indeed, the mother, Lola's mother, has signed the S20 for her to go into care. Now, the question is, where's the best place for her to go? There is actually now a place at Sheila's, because Gary is off at boarding school, although he does come back at weekends and obviously in holiday times. And we have been a bit concerned that maybe you know, Lola and Gary have been doing things that they shouldn't perhaps be doing at their age. What would your recommendation from the school be about where she should go?
I'm tempted to say that the moral fibre and calibre of students once they leave the school gates is nothing to do with me, thank you. I would be concerned about it. However, I recognise that Mrs Patel is a recognised foster carer, and that any situation between Gary and Lola would be handled appropriately within the house.
Sheila, as Gary's foster parent, what would you do?
But I would be very clear about the boundaries that I would have in my own home and those visiting my home, or when Gary would come back, what my expectations are all the way through. And what they get up to, well, they're young and I can't prevent that.
Okay, Dawn, is it a good idea for Lola to go into under the same roof as Gary?
I would say that even as good a carer as Sheila clearly is and has the children's best interest at heart, is I would struggle with agreeing to that placement.
Felicity, what do you think? Are you going to go with Sheila or are you going to go with Dawn?
Well, if we understand they have a pre-existing relationship, I think we're setting ourselves up for a lot of trouble if we were to house them under the same roof, and a lot of trouble for Sheila, who is obviously a very competent carer, but it's things that she probably may not want to have to handle in the middle of the night, for instance. So I think not. I think I'd go with Dawn's suggestion there, that we look elsewhere.
Okay, well, time passes, and although obviously there's disagreement about this, in the end, Lola does go to stay at Sheila's. And Sheila is very tough. Under these circumstances, you make sure they're kept in separate beds, and you know,
Best I can.
it works. You manage it. But Lola's pretty unhappy about that. In fact, she's quite cross with you because she feels you're impinging on her freedom. And Chris, as you're still her form tutor, she comes in and makes actually a rather shocking allegation. She accuses her foster father of sexual abuse. Now, she may be making it up, but what are you going to do about it?
I would take that straight to the designated teacher for child protection. It's not my place to be deciding whether or not she's making that up.
That's fair enough. Okay, Judy, you're the specialist teacher.
I would have to make a referral. It's much too serious for me to sit on. I would have to pass it on and to the social services assessment team.
Richard, do you go along with that?
Yeah, I mean, it's out of my hands once it's got that level of accusation. It just flows away, and even if I know or strongly suspect that it's a load of rubbish, it's
okay.
out of my hands.
Well, the matter is investigated in the proper way, and it doesn't actually get very far because quite quickly Lola does admit it was a false allegation because she was angry with her foster parents. Sheila, she's put you and your husband through absolute hell. Can she carry on staying with you?
I knew you'd ask me that. If I was confident that social services had investigated it properly and had the result, everyone was clear about it and everybody was informed about it, then I probably would let her stay. However, I would want to make sure that there was a meeting held pretty soon with all the professionals where everybody knew the risks that we were now taking on, having had one allegation made against us. So I would want to make sure everyone was very clear about our support should another allegation happen, and support after that as well.
Dawn.
I think that Sheila is absolutely right. People would need to sit down at the end of the investigation to that and actually look at the risks and a full risk assessment taken in relation to Sheila and her husband's position. Also, Lola needs to know that the impact that she's had on people. She's 15 years old now. You know, she's got to take some responsibility for her own actions. We can't.
And whereas I might want to agree to having her back, my husband and Gary may say, no way, we're not risking our lives for that again.
Felicity, it does sound a little bit as if Lola is not going to be able to go back to that foster parent. There is no other foster parent in the area. She's going to have to move schools. Are you going to bow to that inevitability, or are you going to put up a bit of a fight?
It's a very difficult situation, isn't it? I wouldn't like to have to move schools. At 15, if she's in her year 10 or 11, in fact, that's another criteria that's coming in as far as the white paper is concerned at Care Matters, that no child should have to move in their years 10 or 11 in Key Stage 4 because of the inevitable instability, complications. It would be, I think, advisable if she had to move her home to be able to transport her to school so she can maintain her schooling.
Okay, it's a neat way around it. Richard, so it's turned out there was a false allegation. Do you think you should be warning your members of staff that that's happened and it could happen again? Can you do that?
It's a difficult one. I mean, if you put it out there, then everybody's suddenly treating this child as some sort of monster. That's or certainly, you know, it would be. I think that would be detrimental. I mean, you can see the benefits of doing that, but I think they would be outweighed by the negative things. I think what you would want to do is have your designated agents looking, and your staff just keeping an eye. And by that, what I really mean is that they talk to each other. So that if the form tutor's talking to on a regular basis and just keeping an eye open and perhaps chatting with the people at home or wherever it is, I think that's the better way forward. Not because I think you've contextualised it as it was a moment of anger. It was something to do with the living. It's not something that would normally come up on my radar, or something that she's going to just generalise into the school.
Okay. Well, let's go back to Gary. He went off to Eton, done jolly well. Sheila's very proud of him. He got good A-levels. He's gone off to do a B.Ed. And he comes back to you, Richard. And remember, Lola is still at your school. She's in the upper sixth now. He says, I'd really like to do a placement with you at the school, part of my teaching practice.
I mean, yeah.
He's still going out with Lola.
Is he now?
Yeah.
Well, I'll have to make it very clear that there are professional duties and professional lines that have not got to be crossed, and you know, she'd be.
But otherwise, it's a success story. Looked after
Despite him
child.
going to Eton, I would let him come back.
And on that point, thank you all very much indeed. Thank you.